A Little Yuletide Murder, Chapter 9. Although I enjoy cooking, I would never claim to be a particularly successful or inventive chef. That's why I enjoy being around people who are like Richard and Mary Jane Coulson. For this particular evening, they used the recipe for baked oysters taken from a cookbook called The Accomplished Cook or The Art and Mystery of Cookery, published in September of 1664, more than 300 years ago. Pages from it have been reproduced verbatim in another book called Maine Coastal Cooking, published more recently by Down East Books, a Maine publisher. Our host parboiled the oysters in their own juices, washed them in warm water, dried them, seasoned them with pepper, nutmeg, yolks of hard eggs, and salt, wrapped them in a wonderful homemade pie crust, and baked them in an oven. It was a superb entry. Everything else served was on the same level of excellence. Following dessert, we sat in the living room, where Richard served quarters. My antenna had been up during dinner to pick up any conversation about Roy Blink's murder, and the speculation that Jake Welter was the murderer. To everyone's credit, dinner table conversation touched upon every subject except the murder. But once in the living room, Seth Hazlitt raised it. "Well now, Morton," he said, "we've all been on our best behavior this evening." "How so?" Our sheriff said, sitting on the couch next to his wife. "Not a word about Roy's murder, but I'll bet my bottom dollar that everyone here has a question for you." Mort looked at me before saying, "I figure you're right, Seth, and I appreciate everybody holding their tongues. No sense asking me questions. I can't discuss an ongoing investigation." "Who's Rory?" Richard's cousin asked. "A local farmer who was murdered the other day," Seth said. "Murdered?" the cousin said, looking at me. "I thought the only murders that happened in Kabuka were in your books, Jessica." "Generally, you're right," I said, "but this time it was for real." Richard's agent narrowed his eyes and said, "You didn't have anything to do with it, did you, Richard?" "Me? Sure. Remember the old radio series, Cassie Kwan Photographer?" Seth laughed. "I'm the only one old enough here to remember it," he said. "Folks joked that it was called that because the way Casey took pictures, it was a crime." "I never heard of it," the cousin said. "You're investigating the murder?" The agent asked Mort, her eyes opened wide. "Afraid so," he replied. "Has him out of the house day and night." Mort's wife said, patting her husband on the arm, "I prefer it when the only crime he has to investigate is somebody's lobster pot being stolen." Although many questions were now asked of Mort, he remained adamant in his commitment not to discuss the Roy Brent murder. I admired him for that, although I admit my curiosity level wasn't exactly dominant. The party broke up at 11, late for midweek Kabuka social events. We tend to be early to bed, early to rise people. Seth drove me home. "Come in for a nightcap?" I asked. Aye, don't mind if I do." The oyster pie had left me thirsty, and I poured myself a club soda with lime. Seth readily accepted my offer of brandy. "Pleasant evening," I said, as we settled in the living room. "Always is at Richard and Mary Jane's. Don't know if they're the best cooks in Kabuka, but they come close." I was proud of Mort this evening, not succumbing to the temptation to discuss Roy's murder. "He is capable of keeping his mouth shut on occasion," he said, tasting the brandy and smacking his lips. "The perfect end to a nice evening." "Seth, has Mort told you anything about going out to check on Jake's alibi with Dennis?" He didn't answer, but his expression told me he had indeed been privy to additional information about the murder. I know Seth well enough not to press. If he wished to share it with me, he would. "I spoke with Dr. Trace this afternoon," he said, taking another taste of his brandy. "Oh?" "He finished up this autopsy on Rory." Again, I didn't push for further details. You give from Seth Hazlitt only what he wishes to give you. Aye, told me it was a 22 that killed Rory. Bullet dodged right in his brain. I assume it was turned over to Mort, I said. I suspect it was. Probably go out to the state forensic lab down in Portland. It's official, Jessica. Somebody put a bullet in Roy Brent's head. I felt a sudden chill and eyed Seth's half-filled snifter of brandy, but I knew the shiver that went through me was not the result of the temperature in the room. Each time I thought of Roy Brent lying dead on the cold dirt floor of his barn, I suffered a physical reaction as though someone had set off an electrical charge inside or poked a knife in my ribs. Want some cookies? I asked. Thank you. No, Jessica. Quite content. I was heading for the kitchen to refill my glass when Seth said matter-of-factly, as though speaking to no one in particular, Jake's alibi holds up. I stopped mid-stride, turned, and looked at him. Dinners corroborated what Jake said, that they were fixing a stone wall together. That is correct, said Seth. I had my teeth cleaned this morning by Tony Calarusa. He questioned whether Dennis could be counted on as a reliable alibi. I suppose Tony is right, Jessica. But as far as Morton's concerned, Dennis gets Jake off the hook. Mort told you this himself? That he did. Of course, he only gave me a spit of information, just a wee bit. But important information, I said. Does this mean that Mort has officially ruled out Jake as a suspect? Hard to say. I didn't get into that with him. And if I were running the investigation, I'd be looking elsewhere. Of course, I'm not running the investigation. He stood. Much obliged for the brandy, Jessica. What's on your agenda tomorrow? I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. It was a few minutes past midnight. You mean what's on my agenda today? A busy schedule, but I won't bore you with the particulars. I'm sure we'll touch base again. Thanks for the ride, Seth. Careful home. Watch out for that black ice. Aye, aye. I certainly will. Good night. Although the hour was late, I wasn't tired, and sat up until after 1 thinking about what had occurred since that fateful morning of the Christmas festival planning meeting when Tim Trudy arrived back from Roy Brent's farm with the grim news that he was dead. And then, of course, the tragedy was compounded after Mort visited the Brent farm and reported to us at lunch that it had appeared Roy had been murdered. Eventually, I climbed to bed and tried to read a few more pages in the book I started, but as often happens, the act of reading quickly caused my eyes to lower. My final thought before I drifted off was a conversation I had with Vaughn Buckley about doing a true crime book based upon the Roy Brent murder. Doing such a book held little or no interest for me, but then again, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to do a little poking around in the event. I changed my mind. I knew one thing for certain. I wanted Roy Brent's murderer brought to justice before the Christmas festival. If it still hung over our heads during that joyous period of time, much of the Christmas spirit and what it was supposed to mean would be lost. Peace on earth, goodwill towards men. There would be no peace in Kaboot Cove until Roy's murder was behind bars. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye.